Hey Timberline. So I have a testimony to share with you guys that's been stirring in me for a little bit, and I'm finding it sometimes hard to distill into words and into testimony form what God is doing in my life. But I've just really become convicted that testimony is so important, and so even if it's hard sometimes, it's a skill and it's a discipline that I want to cultivate in my life, and it's something that I do want to develop and work on. So thanks for letting me practice on you. We'll see how this goes. And I don't really know where to start, so I'm just going to dive right in and we'll start there. But I've been doing a study of the Gospels recently and of Jesus' ministry. And as I've been walking through that, I've just come to this realization that when Jesus came to earth, he wasn't modeling for us how God would live among humans. He was modeling for us and showing us how humans are meant to live this life. He was showing us the standard of what human life was supposed to look like. And it's hard to describe how striking that is to me because that seems like something that I should have already believed. But when I examine my heart, it's just evident that I didn't believe that. I have this view that Christ's life was the standard, and as Christians we point to that standard and say, Jesus' life on earth is the standard of what we're aiming for. But he was perfect, and he was God. And I'm human, and so I can never actually do that. And God understands that. It's the idea of it's the standard, but we'll never actually live up to it. And when we say as Christians that we want to live as Jesus did, they're nice words, but the subtext is that that's the standard. I'll never be able to do that. One day I'll be redeemed and I'll look like that. But for now on earth, just do your best. Can't actually do that. And I've just really had this passionate conviction that no, that's not correct. I'm actually supposed to look like Jesus. I'm actually supposed to have a life that reflects and that looks like him. Those words he said when he walked this earth, they weren't hyperbole. I'm actually supposed to do that and to live that and to be that. And it's not by my own power. And I realize that that's one thing about how I viewed things before that was correct. I can't do that on my own. But my response to that can't just be to claim that truth and to be like, well, I'll never live up to that. I can't actually do that. Because the other side of the coin is I can't do that, but Christ in me can do that. He can actually transform my life. He can make me a new creation. He can actually achieve that in me. And this all culminated with this realization, and it just drew this cry from my heart of, I don't look anything like Jesus. What happened to me? I've been doing this Christian thing for 28 years, and I don't look a thing like him. How did that happen? And it wasn't a cry of condemnation or despair. It was just an honest cry of, what happened? That this is true. And what followed was just this honest desire of, I want to look like Jesus. Whatever it takes, I just want to look like Jesus. And I've never had that pure of a desire before. And I don't know exactly how to describe it. And I also don't know how to convey how much of that wasn't something that came from me. This isn't something that I stirred up within myself or that I reached by my own contemplation or wisdom or spirituality. This was something that was stirred up in me, and the ability to even see this and to have this desire was from God's grace. This was him in my life. And that's all well and good, but the reason that I felt spurred to say something about this and to share this is partly due to what I heard Francis Chan saying in the video that we shared with you guys earlier this week. Because I think there are some things of what he was saying that really resonated with me, and I was like, yes, they tie into some of the things that I've been learning. Like, there was just this resonance of, yes, this is true. And one of Francis's points was, you have Christ in you, and that changes what you're able to do and how you're able to live. There are things that God wants to get done on this earth in this time, and that's why he made you. And that's not just true of Jesus and his time on earth, or of Francis Chan, who's doing great things. That's true of me, and that's true of you. You are not destined to live an average life. You're destined to live a life that looks like Jesus's. And I think that we need to stop limiting ourselves and thinking dismissively of that. That is something that we can never do, and that's not for us. One of the things that Francis said was, I wouldn't dare ever refer to Jesus as an ordinary guy. You wouldn't dare call Jesus ordinary. But the truth is, that's what Christ says about us now. We are not ordinary, and we can't dare think of ourselves that way. He came and he died so that we could be cleansed and so that his Spirit could live in us. He died so that I could be forgiven, but guys, that was just the beginning. That wasn't even the point of it all. He died so that I could be forgiven and cleansed so that he could dwell in me. And I think that's where the fun begins, when we realize that and when we don't dismiss that. Because his Spirit dwells inside of us. And I just got to the point where I realized, if he dwells in me, it just makes no sense that my life doesn't resemble his. The point is that my life can and should resemble his. And I think that one of the reasons that I shied away from this, and why it was so hard for me to believe some of these things, guys, there are so many scriptures that connect our faith to how we should live and what our life should look like because of it. And I think sometimes I shrink back from those because I don't want work salvation, and I know that that's not right. And I think the question that I was trying to avoid is, well, if my life doesn't look like Jesus, what does that mean? Does that mean that I'm not saved? But guys, I don't think it's a question of salvation. The question is, because I am saved, what am I going to do with that? How is that going to affect my life? Because we were saved for something. We were saved to be something. And if we aren't that thing, if we don't look like Jesus, the question isn't, I don't look like Jesus, does that mean that I'm saved? I think the question is, why don't I look like Jesus? I am saved, why don't I look like him? And I think that that's a valid question because it's a moving forward question. And it's a question that spurs us deeper and it moves us forward. And it's not about questioning what has already been achieved and our salvation that has already been achieved, but it pushes us forward to, how then will I live? How will this affect my life? And that's a valid question. We need to ask that. Because there's an aspect of our faith that has to include us being transformed and obedience and fruit coming forth in our life. The faith that it's talked about in the scriptures, it was an allegiant and a loyal faith. It was a faithful faith that affects the way that we live. It has to affect the way that we live. And I think that it naturally will affect the way that we live when we stop wrestling with obedience and transformation as works and something that we achieve, and we start to wrestle with God and let him step in and transform us and create that in us. And there's a tension in that idea that's hard. There is tension there because we're wrestling with the fact that I can't do it, but I have to let him do it. And I can't do it myself, but that doesn't mean that I just sit and do nothing and wait for him to magically transform me. I have to let him do it and I participate, but it's his work. And there's just this tension that is hard to understand. But I think that just because it's hard doesn't mean that we can discard it. And just because it's hard, it's important, and we can't just skip it, and we can't afford to get it wrong just because we don't understand it. We have to engage with this tension. And I think that understanding of this tension and our experience with it starts with praying for transformation inside of us and asking for it and believing that he will do it and asking for it. One of the things that Francis said was, we need a more resilient form of the church. And it starts with us coming to terms with what we have inside of us. We have Christ in us. Realize that and realize the power of that. And start praying for it. Start praying for the power of that in our own lives. Pray for the heart that God wants to put in us. and the transformation that he wants to achieve in us. He wants to put something new in you. So pray for that. Ask for it. And that's kind of all I can tell you, is to ask for it, because I can't tell you what it will look like, because I don't know what part of God's heart that he'll give you. He might give you a heart for loving your neighbor, and not just loving them once and done or circumstantially on a surface level, but an actual love for them and his heart for them. Or he might give you a desire to disciple someone, and not just teaching or mentoring, but welcoming someone into your life and walking beside them and discipling them and having a love for them like Jesus did when he discipled. Or maybe it'll be a desire to be discipled like that and to seek out someone who can disciple you like that. Or maybe it will be a desire for true community, like Francis was talking about, where you're actually in and a part of each other's lives in a scary and messy but powerful way. And we can actually do that and desire that because God has put that desire in us. Or maybe it will just be some other unique way that he's just been waiting to give to you, and just his heart that he's been waiting to give you. I have no idea what it will look like. I don't know what it will look like, but I think that it starts with prayer. I do think that it starts with prayer. And so I want to put a challenge out to Timberline Church. For the rest of this month, pray for God's heart. And not just a token prayer, but go into his presence and seek this and share your heart as it currently is with him, and ask him to give you his heart. Ask him to give you his heart and ask him to transform you. Because guys, he will do it. He will do it. And it's a journey, and it does start, but he will begin to do that in you, and you won't be able to explain it. So pray. I think that's the invitation and the challenge that comes from this is pray, individually and corporately. Individually, make it personal. Really pray this for yourself, but also realize that it's corporate and we are all doing this together. And we are praying also that this would happen at a Timberline level, that God would give Timberline his heart. We want this part of God's body. We want Timberline to have God's heart and to be transformed by him, as much as I want God's heart and to be transformed by him. And so I just think that there is prayer and there is power in an entire body praying this. God, give us your heart, transform us, and committing to praying that consistently until the end of the month, and just see what happens, because I can't wait to see what happens.